B.HookedCrochet.com. I'm your host Brittany. In this tutorial I'm going to demonstrate how to crochet the puff stitch fingerless gloves. This is a free pattern that's available at B.HookedCrochet.com. You can find the link to that pattern in the description below. To complete this project you're going to need approximately 110 yards of Vicky Howell Sheepish Stripes yarn. I'm going to be using the colorway Citrus. You'll also need a size 5mm crochet hook, a darning needle, and a pair of scissors. This pattern is going to be worked in two different sections. We're going to begin by crocheting the wristband, and then we're going to move on to crochet the hand portion of each of our fingerless gloves. To begin, we need to create a slip knot. And then we'll just place that loop on our hook. And now we want to chain 11. Once we've made our 11 chains, the next thing we want to do is skip the very first chain, so the one that's right next to our hook, and then we're going to single crochet into that second chain from the hook. And we'll repeat that for every chain until we've reached the end. Once you've finished up that first row, we just need to chain 1 and we'll flip our work. And now we're going to make 1 single crochet into every stitch, but we're going to use the back loop only of our stitches, and that's going to create the ribbing effect that you see for the band on the wrist portion. So if you turn it up at the top, you can see the V from each stitch, and so this loop right here is considered the back loop of that stitch. So we're just going to work 1 single crochet into the back loop of every stitch. When you've reached the end of the row, you want to double check and make sure you have 10 stitches, and then we're ready to begin the next row. To begin the next row, we're going to chain 1 again and turn our work. And this row and the remaining rows for the wrist are going to be exactly the same as row 2. We just want to make 1 single crochet into the back loop only of every stitch. So you're going to have a total of 30 rows and working in this same fashion. And so you want to go ahead and finish up your wrist portion by doing just exactly what we've been doing for this row and the previous row. When you've completed all 30 rows for your wristband, come back to this video and we'll talk about how to get started on the next portion of our fingerless glove. Once you've finished all 30 rows, your band should look something like this. And at this point we need to join it together so that we can form a ring. And so basically I'm just taking it and folding it in half, and then I'm just going to grab the working yarn, and now we're going to make a slip stitch into every stitch. So you just want to locate that very first stitch and then grab that working yarn and pull it through and then through the loop on your hook. Now you want to get this lined up properly so that each stitch is in front of each other, and then you'll just insert your hook into the next stitch on one side and then into the next stitch on the other side and slip stitch it. And we're just going to repeat that. Okay, and once you're finished slip stitching, then we can go ahead and bind off. And you want to leave yourself a little bit of a tail so we can weave this in. And then you'll just pull that tail through the loop on your hook to finish this up. Before we move on with the hand portion of our fingerless glove, we're going to go ahead and weave in these two tails, so that way we'll just have the wrist part completely finished. And I'm just going to weave it in through some of the stitches from where I slip stitched. Okay, now we're ready to start on the hand portion of our fingerless glove. First, what we want to do is turn this inside out. So where we wove in our ends and did the slip stitching, that's actually the inside, so we want to hide that by flipping it over. And now we'll just grab our yarn and we need to make a slip knot. And we first have to start off with a single crochet border that we're going to make all the way around the band, and then from there we can actually start our puff stitches. So what I like to do is find, this is our join right here, and we're going to make one single crochet for every single row. So you'll just pull that apart and you can see this is a single crochet stitch right here. I'm just going to insert my hook into the stitch, so it's basically just in between this stitch and that stitch there, and then I'm going to bind on as usual and chain one. Now for the purpose of this pattern, we're not going to actually consider this chain one as a stitch, so it's just a bind on. So we're going to make a single crochet into that same stitch or the same place as our bind on. And now we can see the next place we need to work is right there. So we'll just make a single crochet, and then this is the next row here. So this stitch right there, I just want to work around that stitch, and then the next one here. So whenever you see these like just looks like a single strand, that's because this is a side where we started off with a chain. And then we'll just move over to the next row. We can actually see the stitch there and make a single crochet. And then the next one, we've got that little loop, so we're going to work into that. And the process is exactly the same all the way around. Once you've reached the other side, so where we began, we're just going to join with a slip stitch, and we're going to do so into that first single crochet that we created. So we'll just slip stitch. And now you'll want to count your stitches, because we have to have a certain number of stitches in order to make the next portion work with the puff stitches. And since we have 30 rows of single crochet for our wristband, and we made one single crochet into each of the side of those rows, we should have 30 single crochets. So go ahead and make sure that you have 30 single crochets. We'll be ready to begin the next step. If you're following along with the written instructions, we are working now rounds 2 through 5 of the hand portion of our fingerless glove. And in this portion, we are going to make puff stitches all the way around, and so rounds 2 through 5 are going to be exactly the same. So we're going to go over one in detail, and to begin the puff stitch you want to pull up on that working loop, and you're going to do so as tall as you want your puff stitches. So then we'll just yarn over, insert our hook into that same stitch, yarn over and pull up a loop, and again you want to pull up on that, and then we'll yarn over, insert our hook, yarn over, pull up a loop, and at that point we have 5 loops on our hook. We're going to work that one more time, and once we have 7 loops on our hook, we're ready to finish off the puff stitch. So we just want to yarn over, pull through all 7 of those loops, and we need to chain 1 to finish it off. Now we're going to skip the next stitch, and we're going to work the next puff stitch into the next stitch over. And we're going under both loops of the single crochet stitches, and again you need to pull up pretty tight on that stitch in order to get your gauge where you need it. And then yarn over and pull through all the loops on your hook and chain 1 to finish it off. So we're basically just going to repeat this all the way around. Once you've reached the other side, we can go ahead and join with a slip stitch, and we're going to do so to this first puff stitch that we created. Now the way I like to join is just grab these top 2 loops from the puff stitch, just insert your hook under those loops and slip stitch this round closed. Now at this point you want to take a second and count. You should have 15 puff stitches for this round, and as I mentioned before, rounds 2 through 5 are exactly the same, so this was round 2. So we need to work rounds 3 through 5 in the same manner. Now we'll go over our first couple of stitches here. We want to pull up on that working loop again. We're going to work the first stitch into this space right here. So we'll just yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull up a loop. So we're creating our first puff stitch exactly like we did before, and then chain 1 to finish it off. And then the remaining stitches are going to be worked in the chain 1 space. So it's actually really easy now from this point on. We don't really have to think much about where we're working our stitches. We just find those empty chains and work each of the puff stitches. And don't forget to chain 1 in between every stitch. Moving along to round 6, I wanted to take a quick second just to talk about how round 6 is going to vary based on which fingerless glove you're working on, either the right or the left. Now the one that I have already created fits on the right hand, and that's because the thumb hole is here in the proper place for the right hand. This one I'm creating is going to be for the left hand. And so you'll notice on the written instructions, if you are working on your right hand fingerless glove, you're going to start by making 12 puff stitches, just like we have been for these previous rounds, and then we'll create the thumb hole. In my case, I'm working on the left one, so I'm going to start off by creating 2 puff stitches and then creating the thumb hole. So I'm going to demonstrate here. I'm just going to make my first puff stitch, and now the second, so no matter which fingerless glove you're working on, the thumb hole is going to be exactly the same for both. The only difference here, as I mentioned, was just the number of puff stitches that you're going to put before the thumb hole. So to make the thumb hole, we're just going to chain 3. And then we need to skip one place where we would normally add a puff stitch, and then we're going to add the next puff stitch to that next stitch over. And then we're just going to continue along as we normally would with putting 1 puff stitch into every single one of these chain 1 spaces. Once you've made it back around, we'll just join with that first puff stitch like we did before. And now we'll begin round 7. Round 7 is going to be very similar to all the other rounds. The only difference is how we handle that thumb hole. Okay, and now I've reached the spot of where my thumb hole is, And we're actually going to be decreasing slightly for this round because of where it actually fits on your hand. You need it to be a little bit smaller around your fingers there. So normally we should have 2 puff stitches in this chain 3 space in order to keep up the proper number of puff stitches, but we're just going to put 1 there, and in doing so, like I said, we'll decrease the total number. So we'll have 14 puff stitches total at the end of this round. And so once you place that 1 in the thumb hole chain, and we just move along and crochet as normal. Once you've made it all the way around from round 7, you just want to join with a slip stitch to that first puff stitch. And around 8, we're going to just make 1 puff stitch into every single stitch. Once you've finished up round 8, again, we're just going to join with a slip stitch. And we'll move right along to round 9, which is going to be the last round for this pattern. We're just simply going to chain 1, so we're going to add a single crochet border around the very top portion of our fingerless glove. So we've got our chain 1 that is acting as a single crochet, and then we want to make a single crochet into that very first puff stitch. And then we're going to single crochet into that chain 1 space, and then single crochet into the puff stitch and into the next chain 1 space, and we're going to repeat that for every stitch. Now if you remember correctly, we have a total of 14 puff stitches from round 8, and so in this case we're going to end up with 28 single crochet stitches to finish off round 9. Okay, once you've reached the other side, since our chaining of 1 counted as a stitch into that chain space in between the first and the last puff stitch, so we'll make our last single crochet into the last puff stitch, and then we just want to locate that chain 1, insert our hook, and slip stitch to complete the round, and that's going to finish off our fingerless gloves. So we just cut ourselves a little tail and bind off, and at this point you'll just need to weave in your tails. So you'll have this one, and then where we bind it on here, so on the inside there. This concludes our demonstration for today on the puff stitch fingerless gloves. Stay tuned for more free patterns and video tutorials at BHookedCrochet.com.